Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Autumn raindrops hammered against Quincy's kitchen window. The 42-year-old retired military officer sat at the kitchen table, weathered fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His trained eyes scanned the local newspaper, but his mind wandered elsewhere. Wife Natasha had left on a business trip just yesterday. This was their first father-daughter weekend alone. "Dad, I found something strange." 6-year-old Zara stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "What is it, sweetheart?" Quincy set down the newspaper, giving his daughter his complete attention. "There's a red light flashing behind the living room vent." Zara pointed toward the main room. "It keeps blinking, like monster eyes." Quincy felt his chest tighten, that familiar alertness from Afghanistan battlefields when the environment grew too quiet. "Let's go see this monster, shall we?" He followed Zara to the living room, where she pointed at the floor vent near the window. Quincy crouched down, his knees creaking slightly. Through the grate, he saw what made his blood instantly freeze: a small red LED light pulsing rhythmically, connected to a compact circuit board. His military training kicked in immediately. This wasn't amateur work. This was a professional-grade timing device. "Zara," he fought to keep his voice steady despite adrenaline flooding his veins. "Remember our emergency game? The quick packing one?" Zara nodded, eyes widening slightly. Quincy had taught her evacuation protocols disguised as games, a habit from his military career that Natasha always mocked as excessive paranoia. "We're going to play that game right now. Go get your backpack, the red one with emergency supplies, and Bunny." He nodded toward the stuffed rabbit. "She wants to come too." As Zara ran upstairs, Quincy quickly examined the device without touching it. Military-grade timer, remote activation capability. This was no random attack. Someone had precisely targeted his family. He pulled out his phone, quickly snapped several photos of the device, then swiftly grabbed the emergency bag he kept in the hallway closet, another habit Natasha had mocked, and the secure laptop from his office safe. "I got the important stuff, Dad." Zara reappeared, backpack slung over her shoulders. "Good girl." Quincy scooped her up with one arm. "We're going on an adventure, okay? But we need to leave right now." "What about Mom?" "She comes back tomorrow. We'll call her once we're in the car." Quincy held his daughter tight as they headed toward the garage door. As they drove away, Quincy glanced through the rearview mirror at the house they'd called home for 5 years. His phone rang. Natasha's photo appeared on the screen. Quincy hesitated, then declined the call. First, he needed to ensure Zara's safety. When they were 3 miles from home, the explosion happened. The sound wasn't as loud as Quincy expected, more like a muffled thump echoing through the quiet neighborhood. But the column of smoke rising above the tree line told him everything he needed to know. "Dad, what was that sound?" Zara asked, hugging her rabbit tighter. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart," Quincy replied, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Keep playing your game." He pulled into a roadside diner parking lot, choosing a position with clear sight lines to both their route and the main highway. His phone rang again, not Natasha this time, but a local news alert. "Explosion reported in Oak Ridge neighborhood. Emergency services responding." Quincy dialed a number. "Caleb, it's me," he said when the call connected. "I need your help." "Quincy." The librarian's voice was as calm as ever. "What's happened?" "Someone just blew up my house. I need a safe place to take Zara." After a moment's silence, Caleb answered. "The cabin key is in the usual place. I'll meet you there in 2 hours. Bring your equipment." Caleb won't say anything. Quincy ended the call and looked at Zara through the rearview mirror. She was humming quietly, drawing patterns on the foggy window with her finger. He needed to keep her safe while figuring out who had just tried to murder them. By the time they reached Caleb's mountain cabin, Quincy had taken 6 different routes and switched license plates twice using spare plates hidden in his emergency kit. He parked behind the cabin, out of sight from the main road. Caleb arrived 90 minutes later, his ancient Volvo crunching on the gravel driveway. Quincy watched from the window, one hand on the weapon he'd retrieved from the cabin's hidden safe. "Uncle Caleb." Zara rushed to the door as the tall, thin man entered with his arms full of shopping bags and a worn leather briefcase. "Miss Zara." Caleb's serious face softened as he gave her a proper hug. "I brought hot chocolate and those animal crackers you like." While Zara busied herself in the small kitchen, Caleb approached Quincy. "I drove past the house on my way here. Not completely destroyed, but the living room and entrance are gone. Fire department and police are calling it a gas explosion. It wasn't, Quincy said flatly. I saw the device before we left. Military-grade timer, remote activation. Someone placed it there deliberately. Caleb's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. Who would want you dead, Quincy? That's what we need to figure out. Quincy pulled out his phone, showing Caleb the photos he'd taken of the device. I'm going back tonight. I need to salvage what I can before the evidence disappears. As darkness fell, Quincy had changed into dark clothes and packed a small backpack with tools. He spent an hour with Zara reading storybooks, assuring her he'd return soon. This is a special mission, but not a dangerous one, he told her, tucking her into bed in the cabin's small loft. And Uncle Caleb makes better pancakes than mine. Better than yours? Zara asked sleepily. Much better. Mine always burn. He kissed her forehead. I love you, sweetheart. The drive back to the house took 40 minutes. Quincy parked 3 blocks away, using neighbors' yards and trees for cover as he approached on foot. The house was cordoned off with police tape, but no officers remained on scene. He slipped in through the backyard, assessing the damage. The front of the house was destroyed, but the rear rooms remained largely intact. Using a small flashlight, Quincy navigated through the kitchen to the living room remnants. The explosion had been centered exactly where he'd seen the device, precisely calculated to kill anyone in the room, but not level the entire house. This wasn't about property destruction, it was about eliminating people. Him and Zara. Quincy worked methodically, collecting fragments from the blast center. In the debris, he found what he was looking for, a partially melted circuit board piece. Moving to his home office, he discovered the door had been forced open, though it appeared undamaged by the explosion. His locked files had been searched, and the secure server storing home security footage had been tampered with, the past week's recordings completely erased. Only 2 people had remote access credentials to that system, himself and Natasha. Dawn was breaking as Quincy returned to the cabin. Caleb was already awake, his laptop open on the rustic dining table. Find anything? He asked as Quincy placed the circuit board fragments before him. Security footage was remotely deleted, Quincy said, shrugging off his jacket. Someone didn't want to be seen entering the house. I need you to analyze these fragments. See if you can trace component origins. Small footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Zara appeared, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Dad, you're back. Quincy caught her as she jumped into his arms. I told you I'd come back, didn't I? I always keep my promises. Bunny missed you. She pushed the rabbit toward him. She was talking all night. Quincy took the stuffed toy, feeling something hard inside. Really? What did she say? She said she has a secret. Zara whispered conspiratorially. Mom put it inside her before she left. Quincy's blood chilled. Carefully, he felt along the rabbit's seam for a recently stitched small opening. Inside was a tiny hard object. Zara, why don't you help Uncle Caleb make those pancakes he promised? Quincy suggested, keeping his voice light. I need to check something in my truck. Once alone, Quincy extracted a small flash drive from inside the stuffed animal. Whatever was on it, Natasha had wanted Zara to have it, or for Quincy to find it. He connected it to his secure laptop, running virus scans before opening the contents. The drive contained only one folder labeled Insurance, filled with dozens of encrypted emails. By mid-afternoon, they'd gained access to communications between Natasha and someone identified only as F. The most recent email made Quincy's stomach churn. We just need a few hours, then it's done. He won't survive, and the girl's death will make it look like a fire accident. It's the only way. The timestamp was from the morning Natasha left. Quincy stared at the screen, cold fury rising in his chest. His wife hadn't just betrayed him. She'd planned the murder of him and their daughter. F, he murmured. We need to find out who that is. Already working on it, Caleb replied, fingers moving across his keyboard. But Quincy, you need to be prepared, Dash. If Natasha is involved, then she's no longer my wife. Quincy finished the sentence with an icy voice. She's just a target. 3 days passed before Quincy decided it was time to act. Staying in one location too long was a risk he couldn't afford. Caleb had identified 3 Stratec employees whose names began with F: Franklin Torres, Accounting; Faith Clark, Human Resources; and Florian Morgan, Strategic Operations. Through surveillance photos and deep investigation, they'd identified Florian Morgan, Natasha's direct supervisor, a middle-aged man with cold eyes who'd worked for private military contractors specializing in problem-solving for high-value clients. They're not just business partners, Caleb said, showing surveillance photos. These were taken at a Seattle hotel last month. The photos showed Natasha and Morgan entering a hotel room, his hand possessively placed on her lower back. Quincy felt a strange emptiness as he looked at the images. Not jealousy or hurt, just confirmation of what he'd already suspected. So Natasha and Morgan are both lovers and business partners, he observed calmly. It appears so. Over the past 18 months, approximately $12 million has disappeared through a network of shell companies. The pattern suggests they've been embezzling from classified military contracts. And they need me gone because, Quincy looked at the calendar, because the annual security audit is next month. Strateq will be required to open their books completely. Any discrepancies will be flagged. Exactly. They're out of time to cover their tracks. Quincy's expression hardened. Now they'll face consequences far worse than an audit. Over the next 10 days, Quincy systematically built a case against Natasha and Morgan. He tracked their movements, documented their activities, and set traps to expose their operation. The emotionally devastated husband they expected didn't exist. Instead was the cold, precise tactician his military commanders had once valued. Someone who understood that emotion was the enemy of precise execution. Quincy methodically documented every anomaly, tracking connections with the same clinical precision he'd once applied to battlefield medicine. Every detail became a potential thread to unravel the complex web of deception surrounding him. In a multi-level parking garage in downtown Seattle, Quincy executed the most dangerous part of his plan. He deliberately made himself a target, luring Morgan's enforcer Victor Lang into a controlled environment. Using an electromagnetic pulse to temporarily disable the garage's security systems, a series of flashbang grenades created confusion without permanent harm. In the chaos, Lang fired, exactly as Quincy predicted. The entire incident was captured by Quincy's hidden cameras, including Lang's armed presence and unprovoked gunfire. Facial recognition found him. Caleb messaged from the surveillance vehicle, running him through the system now. The trap worked perfectly. Victor Lang was now identified and on law enforcement's radar. More importantly, his aggressive reaction confirmed Quincy's theory. They weren't just looking for him. They were still trying to eliminate him. Quincy's final call to Natasha was arranged through a complex routing system Caleb designed, making it untraceable to Quincy's actual location. "Quincy, is it really you?" Natasha's voice mixed relief with anxiety. "It's me." He kept his tone neutral, revealing none of the cold fury that had settled in his chest. "You've been trying to reach me. Thank God. I've been so worried. The police aren't doing anything. They think you just need time after the accident. Are you and Zara safe? Where are you?" The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which only deepened Quincy's disgust. She'd always been convincing. What made her so effective in corporate negotiations? "We're alive," he said flatly. "No thanks to whoever planted an explosive device in our living room." A pause. Explosive device? "Quincy, that was a gas leak. That's what the fire department determined." "Stop lying, Natasha. I saw the device before we left." Another pause, longer this time. "If that's true, then someone is targeting us. All the more reason you and Zara should come home. I can protect you." "Protect us? Like you protected the Kingston files." This was a calculated risk reference to non-existent files, but if Natasha was involved in the attempt on their lives, she'd be hypersensitive to any mention of potential incriminating evidence. Her response was immediate and revealing. "What do you know about Kingston?" The false warmth vanished from her voice, replaced by sharp tension. "Enough to understand why someone might want me silenced," Quincy replied, watching recording software track stress patterns in her voice. "The question is how much Morgan knows about your separate arrangements." "Morgan?" She tried to sound confused, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Florian Morgan. Your colleague. What's his connection to this? You tell me, Natasha. You're the one who's been meeting with him every Thursday at the Harbor View Hotel for the past 4 months." A sharp intake of breath. "You've been watching me?" "I've been staying alert," Quincy corrected. "Just like I know about the $12 million that's been moved through Cayman and Singapore accounts." "Quincy, listen to me." Natasha's voice became urgent. "You don't understand what's happening here. I'm not the enemy. There are things I need to explain in person. Like why you planted explosives in our home, or why you told Morgan that Zara was acceptable collateral damage. What? No. The denial seemed genuinely horrified, but Quincy had long stopped believing his wife's performances. I would never hurt Zara. Never. Quincy, you have to believe me. Like I believed you were on a business trip while you were actually arranging our murders? His voice remained calm, but each word carried ice's edge. I saw the emails, Natasha. We just need a few hours, then it's done. He won't survive, and the girl's death will make it look like a fire accident. Silence stretched between them. How did you get those? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You put them on a flash drive, hidden in Zara's stuffed rabbit. Second thoughts, or just another layer of insurance? It's not what you think. Natasha's voice changed again, abandoning the innocent pretense. I needed evidence, protection. Protecting whom? Your partner, the authorities, or were you just making sure you'd be the last one standing when everything collapsed? You don't know what Morgan is capable of, she hissed. What'd he force me to do? I was trapped, Quincy. I'm supposed to believe you're the victim? Quincy's laugh was short and brittle. The same woman who orchestrated a sophisticated money laundering scheme through military contracts, slept with her accomplice, while planning her family's murder? After the call ended, Quincy knew Natasha was trying to distance herself from Morgan, possibly preparing to blame their crimes entirely on him. But her slip about the explosive device had revealed her complicity beyond any doubt. Stratec headquarters occupied 15 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Seattle. On this particular morning, the top floor's main conference room was set up for a major presentation, Stratec's annual security briefing for potential military and government clients. The timing was perfect for what Quincy had planned. From his position in the opposite building, Quincy watched through high-powered binoculars as the room filled with uniformed officers, government officials, and corporate executives. Natasha was there, immaculate in a charcoal gray suit, her composure revealing none of her recent distress. Beside her stood Florian Morgan, tall and confident, his hand occasionally touching her elbow in what observers might see as supportive but Quincy recognized as possessive. Teams in position, Quincy inquired through secure communications. FBI Financial Crimes Division entering the building. Caleb confirmed from the surveillance vehicle parked 2 blocks away. 6 agents plus digital forensics team. They have warrants for all Stratec servers and Morgan's personal devices. Interpol representatives present as observers. They're coordinating with FBI on international accounts. What about media? Channel 4 investigative team arriving in 3 minutes. Anonymous tip about major financial crimes at prominent security contractor too tempting to ignore. Everything was in place. This was the culmination of 2 weeks of meticulous planning, evidence gathering, and strategic leaks to the right authorities. Activate Phase 1, Quincy said, pressing a button on his laptop. Across the street, Stratec's conference room giant screens suddenly flickered. Instead of planned corporate imagery, they displayed financial records, email exchanges, and transfer confirmations, all evidence of Morgan and Natasha's money laundering operation, fully exposed before the assembled military and government representatives. Through his binoculars, Quincy watched the room explode into chaos. Morgan rushed to the control panel, but it was too late. The system had been locked by Caleb's remote access. Natasha's face went pale as she recognized exactly what was being displayed, her practiced composure crumbling. Phase 2, Quincy directed. In Stratec's server room, 12 floors below, carefully planted digital breadcrumbs activated. Every device on the network received the same undeniable evidence just displayed in the conference room. Simultaneously, the same information was transmitted to the personal devices of every Stratec board member, major client, and financial partner. FBI team has reached the conference floor, Caleb reported. Interpol agents moving to secure positions. Channel 4 news van just stopped outside the main entrance. Quincy watched conference room doors open as federal agents entered, led by a serious woman in a dark suit. The military representatives had already stood, faces displaying anger and shock. Morgan's reaction was immediate and desperate. He lunged for his phone, probably to trigger some emergency plan, but one of the FBI agents intercepted him. Natasha didn't resist, seeming to collapse into her chair, head buried in her hands. What's Victor Lang's status? Quincy asked, still watching the scene unfold. Secondary team arrested him at the warehouse 30 minutes ago, Caleb confirmed. They found quite an arsenal, including components matching those from your house. He's not talking, but he doesn't need to. The evidence speaks for itself. Quincy allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction as he watched federal agents handcuff Morgan and read him his rights. Channel 4 cameras were capturing everything. The arrest process, shocked faces of military clients, devastating evidence still displayed on conference room screens. Natasha is being detained, Caleb reported. No resistance. Through his binoculars, Quincy took one last look at his wife as agents led her toward the elevator. For a moment, she looked toward the windows, as if sensing his presence across the street. Her expression was a complex mix of defeat, fear, and something else, perhaps recognition of how thoroughly she'd been outmaneuvered. The federal courthouse loomed like a fortress against Seattle's gray sky, its stone columns and broad steps crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Inside courtroom 3, Quincy sat in the back row, wearing a dark suit and glasses, anonymously watching Florian Morgan being brought in by U.S. Marshals. 2 months had passed since the arrest, 2 months of investigation, evidence compilation, and pretrial hearings. Today marked the beginning of Morgan's sentencing hearing after his failed plea deal negotiations. The proceedings moved with methodical precision. The prosecutor outlined Morgan's crimes with devastating clarity. Your Honor, the defendant has been convicted on 27 federal charges, including money laundering, wire fraud, embezzlement of government funds, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder, she said, pointing to evidence displays. Through a sophisticated scheme lasting 4 years, Mr. Morgan embezzled over $12 million from classified military security contracts, putting national security at risk and violating the trust inherent in his position. Morgan's attorney offered weak counterarguments about cooperation and reduced responsibility. My client maintains he was manipulated by co-defendant Natasha Martinez, who had primary access to these accounts, and dash. The judge interrupted him, expression stern. Counselor, the evidence clearly shows Mr. Morgan's digital fingerprints on every transaction. The jury has already rejected this defense. When sentencing recommendations were presented, Quincy noticed Caleb quietly slip into the courtroom, sitting beside him. Interpol just froze his last hidden account in Macau, Caleb whispered. $3.2 million. His emergency funds are gone. Quincy nodded slightly. Another piece of Morgan's carefully constructed escape plan dismantled. Defendant, rise, Judge Mendez directed. Morgan stood, handcuffs clinking softly. Florian Morgan, this court has rarely seen crimes so elaborately planned and morally bankrupt. The judge began, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. You abused a position of trust, stole from taxpayers, put military personnel at risk through compromised security systems, and attempted to murder a family, including a child, to cover your crimes. Morgan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. This court sentences you to 150 years in federal custody under the Bureau of Prisons. You will serve your sentence at ADX Florence in Colorado, with no possibility of parole. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, housing the most dangerous federal inmates under extremely isolated and secure conditions. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $18 million in restitution, representing stolen funds plus damages. The judge's gaze was unwavering. Mr. Morgan, you used your intelligence and skills to destroy lives. Now you will spend the rest of your life contemplating the consequences of your actions. As marshals led Morgan away, his eyes searched the courtroom one final time. This time, Quincy allowed their gazes to meet fully, deliberately removing his glasses as a gesture of revelation. Recognition flashed across Morgan's face, followed by shock, then cold hatred. Quincy maintained the stare expressionlessly until Morgan was escorted through the side door. Natasha's sentencing was more crowded than Morgan's. A corporate executive's conspiracy to murder her husband and child had captured public imagination in ways that simple financial crimes couldn't. Quincy arrived early, choosing a seat in the second row where Natasha would certainly see him. This time he made no attempt to disguise his presence. When the side door opened and Natasha entered under female marshal escort, the room fell silent. She wore a simple gray dress instead of prison uniform, a small concession by her legal team for more sympathetic presentation. Her eyes immediately found Quincy, widening with a complex emotion he couldn't entirely read. He met her gaze steadily, his expression revealing none of the storm that had driven him for months. The proceedings began with the prosecutor's summary of her case. Your Honor, while Ms. Martinez has pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Mr. Morgan, the severity of her crimes cannot be understated, the prosecutor began. She actively participated in embezzling military contract funds. More disturbing, evidence shows she wasn't merely an accomplice in the conspiracy to murder her husband and child. She initiated it. Quincy watched Natasha's shoulders tense under these words. Her attorney quickly stood. Your Honor, my client has cooperated fully with authorities. She has expressed deep remorse for actions influenced by Mr. Morgan's coercion and threats. Objection. The prosecutor interrupted. Evidence doesn't support this characterization. Ms. Martinez's own emails, authenticated in her testimony, show she suggested the home explosion as the elimination method. The judge nodded. Objection sustained. Continue. The prosecutor displayed projections of the most damaging emails, the ones Quincy had originally discovered in Zara's stuffed rabbit. Natasha's words glowed on screen. The device in the living room vent is the cleanest solution. They'll be there for story time at 8. By the time anyone suspects it wasn't an accident, we'll be settled elsewhere. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Natasha lowered her head, unable to look at her own words. Finally, Natasha herself was allowed to speak. She stood slowly, handcuffed wrists resting on the table before her. Your Honor, she began, voice barely above a whisper, I cannot undo what I've done. I betrayed my family and violated every principle I claimed to uphold. Her voice cracked slightly. I let greed and ambition corrupt me completely, to the point of participating in a plan that would have killed my own child. She turned slightly, looking directly at Quincy. No apology can be adequate. No explanation can justify my actions. I can only say that in my darkest moments, I did try to leave evidence that might protect them if I couldn't. Quincy's expression remained impassive. The flash drive had indeed been Natasha's attempt at insurance, but against Morgan, not for her family's protection. The evidence had made that clear. I accept whatever sentence this court imposes, Natasha concluded, knowing no punishment can equal the pain I've caused or the trust I've destroyed. The judge studied Natasha for a long moment before announcing her sentence. Ms. Martinez, your guilty plea and cooperation have been considered by this court. However, the premeditated nature of your crimes and the particular betrayal of plotting violence against your own child requires significant consequences. Natasha nodded slightly, eyes downcast. You are sentenced to 75 years in federal prison with mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment. You will serve at Federal Medical Center Carswell with no early release. The sentence, effectively life imprisonment for a woman in her 30s, fell heavily on the courtroom. Natasha swayed slightly, but remained standing. Additionally, the judge continued, you are stripped of all parental rights to your daughter Zara Martinez. Full and permanent custody is awarded to her father, Quincy Martinez. At this, Natasha's composure finally broke. A small, wounded sound escaped as she covered her mouth with handcuffed hands. Ms. Martinez, this court has rarely seen crimes combining financial greed with such profound family betrayal. You lose not only your freedom today, but the right to call yourself a mother. As marshals moved to escort Natasha from the courtroom, she turned one final time to Quincy. Their eyes met across the crowded room, hers filled with tears, his cold and resolute. 8 months after sentencing, life had settled into a new normal. Quincy had established a small security consulting business he operated from home, allowing him to remain present for Zara while effectively using his skills. Spring came gently to the mountain cabin Quincy had purchased as their new home. 30 miles from the nearest town, with expansive views of forests and distant mountains, it provided both the security Quincy needed and the natural beauty Zara required for healing. Quincy stood on the wide porch, watching Zara explore their newly planted garden. His sister Estelle had moved into a small guest house on the property, her tattoo business now operating from a converted barn. Her presence had been crucial in helping Zara adjust to their new reality. She's doing better with heights, Estelle observed, joining Quincy on the porch. She handed him a cup of coffee. Yesterday, she climbed all the way to Lookout Rock without freezing. Quincy nodded. Zara's fear of heights had developed after the explosion, a trauma response they were patiently addressing. The therapist says her progress is remarkable, he replied. Children are resilient when they feel safe. Quincy and Estelle watched Zara plant wildflower seeds along the garden border, the child's happy laughter carrying in the spring air. She started drawing again, Quincy said after a moment. Not just memories from before. New things. Future things. Later, after Zara had gone to bed with her new books, Quincy sat in the living room. Caleb placed a folder on the coffee table. Morgan's appeal was denied, he reported. Unanimous decision. Evidence was too overwhelming. He'll spend the rest of his life at ADX Florence. Quincy nodded, unsurprised. What about Natasha? Caleb's expression grew more complex. She's cooperating with ongoing investigations into Strateca's other operations. Apparently, there were more illegal activities than what we exposed. In exchange, she's been transferred to a medium security facility. Quincy's jaw tightened. Any chance of reduced sentence? No, Caleb assured him. The terms of her plea agreement are clear. Regardless of how much she cooperates, the minimum 75-year sentence remains. She'll never be free. It was during one of Caleb's regular visits that he brought the package. This came through official channels, Caleb explained, placing the sealed envelope on Quincy's desk, completely screened and cleared by prison authorities. From Natasha, Quincy stared at the envelope, expression wary. What is it? I don't know. They checked for anything dangerous, but they don't read legal communications. After Caleb left, Quincy still sat at his desk with the unopened envelope before him. Part of him wanted to burn it unread. Natasha had lost the right to communicate with him the moment she planted explosives in their home. But another part, the tactician, the strategist, knew information was always valuable, regardless of its source. Finally, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single document, an unfinished letter from Natasha to Florian Morgan, dated 2 days before the explosion. It had been authenticated by prison authorities, verified against other samples of Natasha's writing from Stratec records. Quincy began reading. Florian, I can't continue this way. Not the way you want. Quincy deserves the truth, not an accident that takes his and his daughter's lives. I agreed to the financial arrangements, the manipulated contracts, even our relationship. But I never agreed to murder, especially not involving Zara. I know what you'll say. It's too late now. We're in too deep. There's no way forward except ahead. But there has to be another option. Quincy has many faults, but he's not unreasonable. If I explained, if I offered to return what we took, I don't expect you to understand. You've never had children. You've never watched someone trust you the way Zara trusts me. I can't betray that trust. Not even for you. Not even for what we planned. I won't back out of our financial arrangements. I still want the life we discussed. But I need to do this my way. I need to at least give Quincy a chance to understand before we disappear. I know you won't like this. I know you'll say I'm being weak. But some lines shouldn't be crossed, even by people like us. Quincy set down the letter, complex emotions churning within him. If this was true, and authentication suggested it was, then Natasha had indeed had second thoughts before the explosion. Not enough to stop it, not enough to warn him, but enough to express doubts. Did this change anything? The device had still been planted. The plan had still proceeded. Whatever momentary doubts Natasha might have had, she'd chosen Morgan and money over her family's lives. Quincy carefully placed the letter back in its envelope and walked to the fireplace. His rational side argued this document should be preserved, filed with other evidence. But something deeper, something primal and human, needed the finality of destruction. He watched the paper catch fire, curl and blacken, then dissolve into ash. Whatever momentary hesitation Natasha might have felt, whatever belated conscience prompted her to write those words, it couldn't change what she'd done. It earned her no forgiveness. Justice had been served. That was enough. Laughter outside drew his attention. Through the window, he could see Zara returning from her hike, carrying a small basket filled with wildflowers and berries. Zara was talking excitedly, gesturing with her hands as she told whatever story she was sharing. This was what mattered now, not Natasha's too-late remorse or Morgan's imprisonment, but the life they'd rebuilt from betrayal's wreckage. The community they'd formed, the safety they'd created, the future they were building together. At 7.5, Zara had grown taller, her face losing some of its baby roundness. But what truly marked time's passage was the change in her demeanor, the easy smiles, her confident way of interacting with other children, the disappearance of that haunted look that had lingered in her eyes long after the explosion. "Dad, look what we found," Zara called, rushing toward the house with her treasure basket. Quincy smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in ways it rarely had before. They hadn't just survived, they had prevailed, not through violence or hatred, but through justice, patience, and the gradual healing that safety and love bring. Natasha and Morgan would spend the rest of their lives in prison, paying daily for their crimes. Victor Lang faced his own charges for attempted murder and prior offenses. The stolen money had been recovered, the conspiracy exposed, the truth revealed. But the real victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in Zara's laughter, in the life they'd built from ashes, in knowing that love and justice could triumph over even the deepest betrayal. Quincy opened the door to welcome his daughter home, and as he did, he felt the last of his anger finally release its hold on his heart. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.